Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. Donald Trump's return to the White House as America's 47th president is set to disrupt the world order yet again. The incoming president's threat of tariff imposition has the America's trade partners already bracing for impact. During his first term in office, Trump hit Chinese goods with tariffs as much as 25%. This forced Beijing to negotiate with America and buy an extra $200 billion worth of American goods. This time around, Trump has promised a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. This shave off 22.5% or about half of China's projected economic growth. So how is China preparing for Trump's second stint as president of the United States? Joining us now to discuss that and more is Andrew Leung, independent China strategist and chairman and CEO of the Andrew Leung International Consultants. We're also joined by Dov Zakheim, a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Andrew, let me begin by asking you, Xi Jinping has advised Donald Trump to manage differences properly. But is China now preparing for another round of trade wars with the United States?
Well, first of all, China and of course Beijing and President Xi himself has been preparing for this for quite some time, even before the election results or before this very election, in the sense that the Beijing sees that, of course, that there is an existential conflict between the two countries, and the United States is viewing China as this existential threat. And so China has been preparing for it for maybe over the past couple of years in terms of a greater emphasis on self-reliance on technology. Secondly, and shifting the economy, China's economy, more towards internal consumption and also services as opposed to exports. And thirdly, targeting markets or expanding markets in the Global South. And don't forget the Global South and even the BRICS countries is bigger than the G7. And of course, China is connected to much more connected to the rest of the world compared with the United States. And China, after all, is the largest trading partner to 128 countries around the world, compared with the United States, 58. And so China is doubling down on this. There is no doubt that the Trump administration is going to change a lot of things around the world in its relationships with China, its relationship with the rest of the world, with the global order. And don't forget that this is an administration very powerful, perhaps the most powerful since President Roosevelt, because as you pointed out, he's already controlled both the Senate and the House. And of course, even in the Supreme Court, he has already stacked the Supreme Court with Republican-friendly judges for life. And of course, it's going to revamp the whole federal bureaucracy, vetting all civil servants for their loyalty, their other merits regardless. And so you would see that he has all the powers he needs to pursue his agenda. And then, of course, Trump is very different from other presidents.
Andrew?
He is, Yeah,
Andrew, I'm just going to get a comment from our other panelist, Dov. Dov, what's your sense? Do you think, and as we've been reading reports, that imposing tariffs of 60% could actually hurt the U.S. economy and probably cause higher inflation as well? Do you think Trump would be rightly advised to go ahead with his plan of imposing tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese imports?
I think it very much depends, and thank you for having me. It depends on a couple of things. First, will he impose tariffs, and he's talked about 10 to 20% on other countries. Will that happen? If it does, then it's definitely going to cause inflation and significant inflation. But he may not do that. I'll give you a good example of that. The Vietnamese are worried about his imposing sanctions on Vietnamese products. Vietnam has had quite a bit of friction with China in the South China Sea and is increasingly seen as a friend of the United States. Does it make sense to impose sanctions on Vietnam? Does it make sense to impose sanctions on America's allies if we want them to join us in dealing with, for example, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So that's issue number one. A second issue is, to what extent can the United States substitute for what China's producing? China is very much entrenched in our supply chain, and it won't be easy to get out from under that in the short term, but it is possible. And you have to remember as well, Donald Trump remembers when he believes he's been double-crossed. And as was mentioned, I think, as you mentioned, there was a deal that China would buy $200 billion worth of American products. That hasn't happened. Intellectual property continues to be stolen. Trump believes, and many Republicans believe, that China was responsible for the COVID epidemic. China denies that, but that doesn't change Trump's mind. So he may well go ahead with these tariffs unless China's ready to negotiate and to stick by what they promise.
Right. Okay. Andrew, what's your sense as to Xi Jinping? What would he be expecting from Donald Trump, the new president of the United States? One thing that also comes to our mind, that things have also changed from 2016 onwards. There is a slowdown that the Chinese economy has also faced. There is a sentiment to move manufacturing away from China. In this context, how would Xi Jinping realistically like to approach Donald Trump?
Well, I think that Trump being Trump, his tends to be very transactional. And his views of allies are very different from the Biden administration. And even looking at the Ukraine war, he's already declared more than once he's going to end the war in one day. And he doesn't believe in American spending his blood and fortune in Europe. And of course, there is a realist kind of mentality or advice that the United States should concentrate and move away from Europe to concentrate on China. And so I think that he's likely to end the war in Ukraine sooner than people think. That means that Russia is likely to retain a lot of its occupied territories, even though they are not its sovereignty is not formally recognized, using perhaps a Korean War armistice formula. But that would have a tremendous impact on the global economy because the disruptions on a lot of commodities would be eased, and then the trade flow would become easier. But on the other hand, I agree that definitely it's going to impose 60% tariffs on China, and indeed a higher tariffs on other countries, because he does believe that tariffs is a beautiful weapon. And he even touted tariffs as a substitute for income tax. So I think that you got to believe that that Trump is very, very different. As for allies and as for and even on Taiwan, I mean, he doesn't believe that that the United States would defend Taiwan, without getting economic returns from it. So I think that he's very transactional, and the same applies to his relationship with allies, whether with NATO, Europe, or for that matter, India. Of course, India is a very, very good friend of the United States, and I think that the relationship will continue. But I don't think that he's going to put all the bets on India or on the allies, and then he's concentrating on what benefits are going to any relationship or any kind of action is going to bring back to the United States.
Dov, my final question to you. For the last 2 years, there has been a concern in the U.S. that Taiwan could be the next front after Ukraine. How seriously would Trump follow on this threat? And do you think that any kind of harsh tariff regime by Donald Trump could lead to a Chinese offensive in Taiwan?
Well, regarding Taiwan, you've got to remember that there are a lot of Trump supporters, people who are very close to him, who feel very strongly about defending Taiwan. If you look at the Congress, it's one of the very few issues that unite Democrats and Republicans, not like Ukraine, where there really is a difference there, even within the Republican Party. So that's number one. Number two, I agree that Trump is transactional, but he's not transactional when it comes to China. Let's be clear about that. He's not changed his mind at all about China. No matter how much he's actually said nice things about Xi Jinping, but that hasn't changed his attitude to tariffs or to China generally. So if you combine those two factors, the fact that he doesn't really see China as anything like a friend or even a neutral, and sees it as a threat, and the fact that many in his party, including some of his leading advisors, do believe that that Taiwan needs to be defended. And in fact, many of those who say that the United States should ease up on Europe, let the Europeans defend themselves, let Ukraine worry about itself, they believe that the reason for doing that is that China is the threat and a threat to Taiwan. Now, obviously, that Trump will want something back from the Taiwanese, but it'll be a lot easier for the Taiwanese to accommodate him than I think China could. So I do believe that if the Chinese are stupid enough, quite frankly, to try anything against Taiwan, they will be making a huge mistake.
Right. Thank you very much, Dov, and Andrew, for joining us on the program. Important times ahead. There will be a period of uncertainty till the presidential transition is complete, and let's see how things move on after that. With that, it's a wrap of this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.